Well, Windows 10 is going to be end of life as of October the 14th, 2025. So, what does that mean exactly? Well, increased security risks. For one, without security updates, your Windows 10 operating system is going to be very vulnerable to malware and viruses and other threats. Limited functionality, some features and applications may stop working or become less reliable, and there will not be any technical support. So, what are your options? I know you don't want to hear this, but you can't upgrade to Windows 11. God help you, though, if you do, because who knows what Microsoft's going to dream up next and bake into that operating system. You know, they've already thrown in Copilot Plus and Recall and so much bloatware that, makes you sick almost installing it. There are ways to get around most of that. You can Google Chris Titus and MicroWin, and that's a little neat app where you can create ISOs, create pretty much an unattended local user account, unbloated version of Windows 11. But there is an issue right now I believe he's trying to resolve when it comes to the File Explorer is apparently linked somehow to Recall. And if you remove the link between Recall and File Explorer, it breaks File Explorer. So, that's a problem, certainly. Your other options would be, of course, Mac OS or Linux. Now, there is another option. Maybe there's more options, which I'm not really going to get into in this video, but the legitimate options you have would be Windows 10 Enterprise as well as Windows 10 Education editions, and they will actually offer support until October the 10th, 2029. Now, these dates could be extended. This, could change. And I believe those versions, the Enterprise and Education, I think they are subscription based. I'm not quite sure. Anyway, that's it for me, but I'm going to hand it over to Google's Notebook LM and let them discuss even more about this.
Have you ever wondered what that pesky Windows update notification is all about? Today, we're going deep into the world of Windows updates, and more specifically, what happens when those updates stop coming. We're diving into a document straight from Microsoft about Windows end-of-life support, and there's a date that caught our eye. October 2025. That's when support for Windows 10 is officially ending. Now, before you hit that snooze button on this news, we're here to break down why this date is more important than you might think.
What's fascinating here is that end of life doesn't mean your computer suddenly stops working. It's a gradual process with significant implications.
So it's not like someone at Microsoft flips a switch and your computer turns into a useless hunk of metal.
Exactly. Your PC will still function. You'll still be able to browse cat videos. But after October 2025, Microsoft is drawing a line in the sand. No more free security updates, no more tech support for Windows 10 issues, and no more software updates from Windows Update.
Okay, so let's unpack this. This is about more than just missing out on the latest and greatest features, isn't it?
You've hit the nail on the head. It's primarily about security. You see, even if your computer seems to be running fine now, without those regular security updates, you're essentially leaving your front door wide open to digital threats.
It's like thinking, oh, we've never had a break-in on our street, so why bother locking the door? But in the digital world, those threats are constantly evolving, right?
Precisely. Every day, new viruses, malware, and other nasty programs are being developed to exploit vulnerabilities in software, including operating systems like Windows. Security updates are crucial for plugging those holes and keeping your computer safe.
So using Windows 10 after the deadline is like playing Russian roulette with your data.
That's a bit dramatic, but you're not far off. You might get away with it for a while, but it only takes one successful attack to compromise your entire system and potentially lose valuable data.
So what can users do? Is everyone just expected to switch to Windows 11?
That's certainly Microsoft's preferred route. And to be fair, they've made the upgrade process relatively painless, especially if your PC meets the requirements. You can easily check if your computer is compatible with Windows 11 in your settings. We'll include a link in the show notes for those who want the detailed steps.
That's handy. But what about users who might have older computers that can't handle the demands of Windows 11? Or those who, for whatever reason, simply don't want to upgrade to a new operating system? What are their options?
That's where things get a bit trickier. Microsoft's stance for those users is pretty clear. If you want the most secure and supported experience, buying a new PC with Windows 11 is the easiest way to go.
It really makes you think about the life cycle of our devices, doesn't it? We've become accustomed to our phones getting software updates for years, but there's always that point where older models are left behind.
That's an excellent point, and it's not just limited to phones. Microsoft is essentially applying a similar approach to its operating system. Eventually, older versions reach a point where it's no longer feasible or cost-effective to continue providing support.
And this whole end-of-life thing isn't unique to Windows 10, is it? What about those who are still using older versions like Windows 8.1 or even, dare I say it, Windows 7? What are the implications for them?
The dinosaurs of the Windows family. You'd be surprised how many people are still using them. But as you might expect, the situation is even more critical for those users. Support for Windows 8.1 ended back in January 2023, and Windows 7 reached its end of life even earlier in January 2020.
Wow, I didn't realize it had been that long for Windows 7. So for those users who are still clinging to those older systems, are they just sitting ducks for digital threats?
That might be putting it a bit harshly, but they're definitely more vulnerable. Microsoft's advice for those users is essentially the same: upgrade to a supported version of Windows. However, the upgrade path is often more complicated, especially for those on Windows 7.
So upgrading to Windows 11 from these older versions isn't as simple as clicking a button. What are some of the challenges they might encounter?
For starters, compatibility is a major hurdle. Many older PCs simply don't meet the minimum system requirements for Windows 11. And even if they do, the upgrade process itself can be more involved and might require clean installations or even purchasing a new Windows 11 license.
So we've talked about the risks of sticking with an unsupported operating system and the upgrade path that Microsoft recommends, but let's talk about something that's often overlooked in these discussions: your personal data. When transitioning to a new operating system, you'll want to ensure that all your precious files, photos, documents, and embarrassing karaoke videos are safely transferred over.
Ah yes, the digital baggage we all carry. Thankfully, Microsoft offers a solution for that: Windows Backup. This handy tool helps you pack up your digital suitcases, so to speak.
So it's like a moving van for your digital life. Tell me more.
Exactly. You can use Windows Backup to save and transfer all your important files, from documents and photos to settings, apps, and even your login credentials. This can make the transition to a new PC much smoother.
That makes sense. And I'm guessing Microsoft is also keen for users to embrace their cloud storage service, OneDrive, as part of this transition.
You're right, they're definitely pushing it, especially for those who plan to stick with their Windows 10 PCs for a while longer. Their logic is that even though support for Windows 10 is ending, you can still keep your files backed up and accessible on other devices using OneDrive.
It's a clever strategy. Essentially, they're saying, even if you don't upgrade your operating system, at least upgrade your data storage habits. Now, for our listeners who are still using Windows 10, what should they be doing today to prepare for this end-of-life date?
Well, they've got some time.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's never too early to start thinking about their digital game plan.
Right.
Do they rely on their Windows 10 PC for work?
Yeah.
Are there irreplaceable files stored on there?
Mhm.
These are questions they need to be asking themselves now.
It's like that old saying, prepare for the worst, hope for the best, right? But in this case, preparing for the worst is actually a pretty smart move,
Yeah.
even if your Windows 10 PC seems to be running smoothly right now.
Absolutely. It's about taking a proactive approach to your digital security and data management. It's a good time to take inventory of what's on that Windows 10 machine.
Okay.
What needs to be backed up?
Yeah.
What can they afford to lose?
It's interesting, isn't it? This whole end-of-life situation really highlights the value of our data. It forces us to think about what's truly important to us in this digital age.
It does. And it's not just about backing things up. It's about good digital hygiene in general. Do you have a clear understanding of what data you have
Right.
and how it's being stored?
That's a good point. It's easy to just click save without thinking about where that file is actually going and how we're going to access it in the future, especially if we do need to upgrade or replace our computer.
It's like having a filing cabinet full of documents, but no system for organizing them. Sooner or later, it becomes unmanageable.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we've established that backing up your data is crucial, regardless of whether you plan to upgrade or stick with Windows 10 for as long as possible. But let's go back to those users who are still holding on to those older operating systems. We're talking Windows 8.1 and Windows 7. What are some of the specific challenges they might face, aside from the upgrade complications we discussed earlier?
Well, one significant issue is the availability of software. As developers move on to newer operating systems, they might stop offering support or updates for their software on older versions of Windows.
Yeah.
This means that users of those older systems might find themselves unable to run certain programs or access certain websites.
It's like being stuck with a flip phone in a smartphone world.
Yeah.
You can still make calls and send texts, but you're missing out on a whole universe of apps and features that are now considered essential.
Exactly. And it's not just about missing out on the latest and greatest, it's also about security. Those older programs that are no longer being supported might have known vulnerabilities that hackers can exploit.
So it's like driving a vintage car without seatbelts. It might look cool, but it's not the safest option in today's traffic.
A very fitting analogy. And remember, this isn't just speculation. There have been documented cases of hackers specifically targeting users of older, unsupported operating systems because they know those systems are more vulnerable.
So, to be blunt, for those users who are really attached to their Windows 7 machines, it might be time for a bit of tough love.
I think that's putting it nicely. It's not just about convenience anymore. It's about protecting yourself in an increasingly digital world.
So we've talked about the security risks, the data management aspects, and even the software compatibility issues. But there's another angle to this whole end-of-life scenario that I think is worth exploring: the psychological impact. Changing operating systems, especially if you've been using the same one for years, can be a big adjustment. It's not just about learning new menus and shortcuts, it's about adapting to a different way of interacting with your computer.
That's a very astute observation. We often underestimate the emotional connection we have with our devices and the digital environments they create. It's like moving into a new house. It takes time to feel settled and comfortable.
Exactly. And just like moving into a new house requires decluttering and reorganizing, upgrading to a new operating system can also be an opportunity for a digital refresh.
Absolutely. It's a chance to clear out those digital cobwebs, organize our files, and perhaps even rethink how we use our computers. Are we still getting the most out of our devices? Or are we clinging to familiar but outdated ways of doing things?
And that brings us to a crucial question for our listeners. When was the last time you upgraded your computer? Not just the software, but the entire system. Are you still using a device that might be holding you back?
It's a question worth pondering. Technology has evolved rapidly in recent years, and newer computers offer significant advantages in terms of speed, performance, and even security.
It's easy to get caught up in the mindset of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But sometimes we need to recognize when our trusty devices are reaching the end of their useful life.
Indeed. It's about finding the right balance between familiarity and progress. And sometimes embracing progress means letting go of what's comfortable, but ultimately limiting.
Well said. So for our listeners who are feeling that itch to explore their options, whether it's upgrading their operating system, investing in a new computer, or simply decluttering their digital life, we'll provide some helpful resources in the show notes.
We'll include links to information about Windows 11, tips on data backup and storage, and even some guidance on choosing a new computer that meets your specific needs.
Because at the end of the day, it's about empowering our listeners to make informed decisions about their digital lives.
Absolutely. It's about navigating the ever-changing landscape of technology with confidence and ensuring that our digital experiences are both secure and enjoyable.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Windows updates and the end of life cycle, it's clear that these updates are more than just a technical necessity. They're a reminder that our digital lives are constantly evolving and we need to adapt alongside them.
That's a great way to put it. It's about staying informed, taking proactive steps to safeguard our data, and embracing the opportunities that technology presents.
And remember, even if you're not ready to upgrade your operating system or your computer, there's always something you can do to improve your digital hygiene.
Think about your digital habits. Are you backing up your data regularly? Do you have a plan in place for what happens if your computer suddenly stops working?
It's a lot to think about, but it's an essential part of being responsible for our digital lives.